All right, so we are recording. Okay, welcome everybody to Fermenting Summer Fruits with our Chief Fermentation Officer, Nutritionist, and Chef Karen Diggs. I am Linda. I am going to be your operator this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, wherever you are. It's awesome to have all of you. We like to start with a little icebreaker. Go ahead and drop in the chat where you are joining us from. We always like to see where our fermenting community is. We have
Yes, this is
Ontario, Canada. We have two
woohoo!
Ontario, Canada. We have
All right,
Austria,
Canadians.
Tampa, Omaha, Cardiff, Wales, Fiji,
Wow.
Germany, Halifax, Novato, Chicago, Vancouver, Temecula, Virginia, Tallahassee, Jersey, Santa Fe, Washington, Walnut Creek. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Karen and I, myself, we're both in the San Francisco Bay Area. So hello to all the Bay Area folks out there. And we truly have an international audience, as you can see. That's really
Yay.
awesome. Happy summer, happy Pride if you're celebrating. I just have a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. So you all just use the chat function. That's awesome. So the chat is going to be for anyone who needs to contact me with any kind of technical issue. If you can't hear, you can't see, can't access any links, you can send me a private message to a panelist and I'll try to help you out. And it's also for you to interact with each other. You can make a comment about whatever you see on the screen. If you have a question for Karen about what she's doing in class, go ahead and use the Q&A function that's also on the bottom of your screen. It just keeps it a little neater that way, and we will try to answer as many as we can towards the end of the class. So again, if you have a question for Karen about what she's doing, please drop it in the Q&A section, okay? And then also, Karen will be demonstrating two recipes for you today, one with blueberries and one with cherries. We share a link to those recipes in your reminder email, but if for whatever reason you didn't see it, I can drop that for you right now. So,
It's so
okay.
exciting that we have people from around the globe. Yay.
Okay, great. Okay. So this is the link to the two recipes that Karen will be sharing. This is just so that you have it with you, so you have all the measurements and everything, but don't worry about trying to memorize it today or anything, or try to follow every single step. We'd rather that you pay attention to what Karen is doing on the screen. This session is being recorded and we will share that with everybody probably sometime in the middle of next week. So if you want to forward it to a friend or if you want to rewatch it, you will have a copy of this recording at the end. Okay, so without further ado, let me turn it over to Karen.
Hey, everybody. Again, welcome, welcome. For those of you who have joined us before, good to see you again. For those of you who are completely new, welcome into my kitchen where I'm always cooking, fermenting, and ruminating on all manners of things. So today's webinar is going to be on fruits, and in particular, summer fruits. Oh, and by the way, you know what, before I launch into this whole thing, I wanted to thank my colleague Linda again for helping out. It's always much better with her on board. And she, by the way, is an awesome chef as well. So, all right, now let's get back to the summer fruit. So I think for some of you, you may have already followed me before on previous webinars on how to ferment sauerkraut or kimchi and what do I do? Nuts, fermenting nuts and all kinds of things. And occasionally we would have a short conversation about fruits. So I decided to dedicate a webinar just to talk about fruits today, because there's also a lot of concerns or just people don't know how to incorporate fruit into a proper lactic fermentation process. And so I want to explain that. But actually, the recipe is really, really simple. So I'm not going to actually spend a lot of time on the recipe today, although I will demonstrate one of the recipes for you. What I want to also take a little time on is to concentrate on how to make a brine and how to measure the salinity, because when it comes to fruit, it actually is more relevant than making sauerkraut. But before I start, I just want to say, for those of you who are new, my name is Karen. I am a classically trained chef, and I am the Chief Fermentation Officer and a nutritionist. So I'm a Chief Fermentation Officer for 2 fermentation devices. For Crowdsource, which is my original device, it fits onto any mason jar or any jar that has an opening of 86 millimeters. So this is actually not a mason jar. It's a cute, adorable Italian jar. The reason why I'm showing this is because some of you may already notice that it's hard to get a hold of a mason jar nowadays because everyone's into preserving and making things at home due to COVID. So it does fit onto other jars that has a 86 millimeter opening. And then this is my new exciting project called ChouAmi, and it fits onto these beautiful French-made glass jar that has a straight side, and it's a larger version of Crowdsource. The only difference is that the cap is a little bit dome, and there's a little cabbage embossing on top, and it fits onto these beautiful French-made Le Parfait jars that has a straight side. I love using both of them, and so I just wanted to make that clear because some of you came from our ChouAmi newsletter invitation list, and some of you came from Crowdsource. So they function exactly the same way. The difference only being that we decided to have a second version because Le Parfait, actually, the jars are available more to our European cultured friends or even friends in Asia and South America over mason jars. So we really want to give that option because our final goal is to have everyone fermenting left and right. Doesn't matter where you're from. So that's the difference. And I just wanted to explain that first. All right. So I just wanted to start first by maybe, Linda, and maybe you can help me monitor this. How many people have actually tried fermenting with fruits? And I'm just kind of curious. But Linda, you can tell me as we go on. I'll keep on continuing. Oh, before I start, I always start with a little shot of pickle brine. So here I go.
Great. I think we have about 4 people who raise their hands.
Okay, so not a whole lot. Okay, so this
Some
is
people
my
have done plums and apples.
Okay, cool. All right, plums and apples, great. Okay, so by the way, I do want to show you, you guys, you see that we have a secondary camera to give you a closer look. So this is something that we're experimenting with as well. So on this closer camera, you can see like I've done ume plums. These are actually regular big plums. This is actually from last year, by the way. And kumquats, one of the favorite things that I've started fermenting with. I love the kumquat, and the brine is really, really beautiful. And this is a jar of blueberries that I fermented last summer. It's been in my refrigerator, and as you can see, it's still perfectly fine. And then another one, these are just whole cherries. I got lazy. I just dumped them in some salt brine and preserved them. So these are sort of the fruit ferments that I have in my refrigerator right now. And of course, for those of you who have made sauerkraut or follow a couple of my recipes, you can definitely put in some apples, chopped apples or pear with a primarily cabbage-based sauerkraut recipe, or you can add in pears to kimchi. So that is one way of incorporating fruit into your vegetable ferment. But the thing that I want to address, and probably the question that I get most, is what fruits can I ferment and not ferment, and how much fruit can I add? So this is the important thing, how much. Let's take something like a mango that has a lot of sugar. And the problem with lactic fermentation is we want the lactic acid bacteria that are naturally occurring on all fruits and vegetables to give us that boost in the fermentation. And then ultimately, the end product should have live cultures, and it should be beneficial. It will have the lactobacilli family of cultures in there because they act as preservatives. But as many of you know, the lactic acid bacteria family are also what we call probiotic components that's good for your gut and a lot of other things too. So that's why I'm crazy about fermentation, not only for the taste, but for the health benefits. However, if you are adding in fruits that have a high sugar content, for those of you who have made beer or well, wine more so with grape, you know what happens. We sort of skip over the lactic fermentation part, and then next thing you know, you have ethanol, or you have an alcoholic fermentation that becomes very bubbly, and then it becomes alcohol, which may not be a problem if you are making alcohol, but it will be a problem if you're making lactic fermented foods. So that's why there's a little bit of a skill set that you need to learn in order to preserve fruits using a salt brine. Now, I started with things like kumquats and plums and blueberries because they are relatively low in sugar compared with mango, and they can be kept whole so that you don't break apart the membrane and release a lot of carbohydrate. So that's why these ferments have been highly, highly successful, for me at least, and for other people who have done the same. Now, what I love about preserving this way is that I'm not using sugar. I know some of you out there might be doing a lot of preserves using sugar to make jam, which is fine. But for me personally, I really try to limit my exposure, let's say, to sugar, because, you know, there's just so much of our commercialized food has sugar in it. And if you're honest with yourself, you know that you're addicted to sugar. So then when I figured out these recipes, I wanted to create a way that was very, very simple to preserve the integrity of the fruits, but giving it a different flavor profile so that it opens up your palate to try new things with fruit. So we're getting like salty with our fruit, sort of speak. I think the most familiar one is probably Umeboshi plums. So I do have a recipe on the Crowdsource website for that. However, it's actually very, very difficult. There are several processes that you have to do in order to make authentic Umeboshi plums. And first of all, you have to start with the actual ume plums, the fresh ume plums, which are only available during a short time in the spring. So that's why I'm not showing you how to do ume plums. If you look at the two recipes that I sent you, basically all you're doing is dunking some fruit or sometimes some fruit mixed with vegetables into your jar and covering it with brine. And that's why I want to spend a little time with the salinity over the actual recipe. But having said that, I will do a demonstration on the cherry and onion recipe. So I actually was not able to find pearl onions in my local supermarket. I went to two, they just didn't have it. So just so you know, on the recipe, it says pearl onions, but if you can't find it, you can just use a white onion. You can also use shallot, or you can just use a yellow onion if there's nothing else available, no problem. My thinking behind that recipe is because I love chutneys, and I love the idea of that sort of savory, sweet, tangy flavor of chutney over food, whether it's grilled meats or grilled vegetables, or even sometimes tossed with noodles. But I didn't want to go the vinegar and sugar route. So my original recipe, this one, I probably developed it like in 2014. I decided to use cherries because they're sweet and tart, combined with onions, and then warming spices like vanilla and cinnamon stick to replicate the ingredients in a traditional chutney, but in this case, we're fermenting it. So I mentioned that because some of you are probably looking at those ingredients and you're like, what's going on there? But trust me on this one, once you've made it, and I hope you do try to make it, you're going to just fall in love with the flavor profile. And the bonus is you can use that lovely brine to make a cocktail, which I will do later. So I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly. There's just a few tips, and I'm just going to do a small jar. The recipe I gave you is for like 1,000 for this size here, the 1,000 millimeter, or you can also use a mason jar, which is 1 quart. So that's the recipe measurements I gave you. But for the sake of expediency today, I'm just going to do it in a small 500 millimeter Le Parfait jar, which has the straight sides. So for the ingredients on this, you need to take cacao nibs. And because cacao nibs are very small, you want to always put the small ingredients on the bottom of the jar. That way you minimize things floating to the top, because we don't want things to be floating to the top when we're fermenting. I mean, they will float a little bit, but eventually they'll sink down. So always start with your small ingredients into the jar. All right, what the heck, let's do all of it. And then we're gonna take our other chopped ingredients. So I'm just gonna quickly chop some onion. We're not gonna use the whole onion for this jar because that's just like too much. Okay, so I'm just gonna do it the quick way, like this. Put that aside, peel this onion. And I'm just gonna chop it into little chunks to kind of replicate the idea of pearl onions. But definitely, if you can get a hold of some pearl onions, that is also great. So like I said, I'm just going to quickly, I think that's enough. Cut it into little pieces like that. Okay, that's all you need to do. And if you do choose to use vanilla, I did want to show you guys, you know, vanilla pods are kind of expensive nowadays. So if you don't have vanilla, you can actually add maybe about half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. That's fine. But if you do have a vanilla pod, the way to really optimize on the flavor is you actually need to cut it and release the little tiny seeds in the vanilla pod. It smells so good. So I'll show you guys how. And you don't have to use the whole thing, because like I said, these things are expensive nowadays. For this amount, you could just use a quarter of the bean. Okay, so now we have this quarter, and what you want to do is take a nice sharp paring knife and slice it like that. Okay, and then you're going to open up the bean or the pod, and the seeds are actually inside here. Okay, so you can do that and just put that in. It smells so good, the cacao nib and the vanilla. And so that's what you want to do. And, you know, save this for something else. You can put it in alcohol to make a vanilla vodka, or you can put it into your sugar jar to make vanilla sugar. So don't waste this. Now we're going to put our ingredients in. So I already pitted the cherries. The reason I pitted them, I cut them in half and took the pit out. If you have one of those fancy things where you can go in there and take the pit out, you can use that too. So we're just going to mix the pitted cherries with the onions and put it into the jar. And by the way, since we have this handy dandy close-up camera for those of you who are wondering, like, how do you pit the cherry if you don't have one of those cherry pitters? Basically, you do have to cut it in half. So I just cut this in half like that, and you just take out the seed. Pretty simple, okay? And by the way, people always complain like, oh, you know, this takes so much time, that takes so much time when you're doing it by hand. Guess what? Fermentation is slow. It's great to do things by hand. It only took me about 10 minutes to pit all these cherries, you know, and it helps you relax and you're doing something manual. So I do advise people to do things by hand if they can. So now we're just going to put these ingredients in to the jar. Okay. And by the way, when you're putting in ingredients that can be compacted in, because there's a lot of airspace in between, you can pretty much fill it up, not to the top, but almost to the top, because over time, if you're using crowdsource or ChouAmi, the weight of the spring is going to compress everything down so that we have about an inch. So this is about the right amount for this jar. And then the next thing we do is, oh, you know what? I almost forgot the cinnamon stick. So I'm using a whole cinnamon stick, and because this jar is shorter, I'm just going to break it like that and stick that onto the side. In it goes, there goes the cinnamon stick. And now we're going to assemble the ChouAmi. If you have a crowdsource, it's the same principle. But if you don't have any of these, you can actually weigh it down with a jar that has pebbles in it. I'm not going to go through the basics of fermentation because I'm assuming that most of you already know that. if you don't check out our other basic webinars. But if you need something to weigh it down because you don't have any of these fermentation apparatuses, you can actually use something like this. Okay, so, but before I assemble this, we need brine. So my brine is right here that I've already made. And we're going to talk about brine salinity next. Okay, so I'm just shaking this up a bit. And I'm going to pour the brine over my cherry and onions and lovely spices. Okay. And now we're going to assemble. So you guys know how to do this. The press, the spring, the moat, anchored onto the jar. Make sure the ring is on securely. There we go. Let this lever down. Like I said, this looks a little bit full to the top right now, but because there's a lot of airspace between the onions and the cherry, by tomorrow it should compress down and I would have enough headspace here. Okay, so we'll let that go and then fill the moat with regular tap water and cap it. And there we have our recipe all done. So as you can see, that took no time. The same thing you can do the same thing with the blueberries. So I'm not going to actually show you because it's the same process. And with this recipe, I added in roses. And a lot of people ask me, like, where do you get those beautiful organic rose buds? I get it from Mountain Rose Herbs. I love that company. So that's where I get mine. But you know, you can also source it from other places as well. But it is important to get organic. Okay, so the blueberry recipe is just basically the same idea. Blueberries, roses. You can add in some cardamom if you like. You can also add in the vanilla if you like. And then you're going to get, you know, lovely flavors for the fruit itself and then for the brine. So by now you're probably thinking like, oh, fermented blueberries, that's really weird. Like, how does it taste? Okay, I'm going to try and describe it to you. With blueberries, it's kind of like a miracle for me because I love, love, love olives. Well, the first time that I fermented blueberries, it was amazing to me because it sort of tastes like a cross between an olive and a blueberry. Because when the blueberries sit in salt, the skin actually becomes more crunchy when you bite into it. So it has that quality of olives, but then it still maintains its blueberry characteristics. And I'm thinking like, because we haven't heated it up, there's probiotics or live cultures in the ferment, it probably retained a lot of the vitamin C because we never cut into the blueberries and is all fermented. So the blueberries have become actually one of my favorites as well. So that's the fruit ferments and the recipes. I'll take a pause here and just ask Linda, are there any questions that's coming up with the recipes I need to address?
With the recipe itself?
Yeah, any questions right now, since I just went over?
We have a lot of questions.
Oh, okay.
You want to take any right now?
No. I just thought if there were any outstanding questions pertaining specifically to the recipes, or should we wait?
I think you should just wait.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, you guys, in the interest of like zero waste, those lovely cherry pits that you pitted out of your cherries, you can actually put it into some brandy or vodka and make a cherry infused, you know, something or other. I'm not going to go over that because there's 1,000 recipes online, but you can look into that. So I usually save my cherry pits, just pour some alcohol over it, let it sit for a little bit, and you've got like a flavored alcohol. Okay, so that's that. All right, now let's move on to the salinity of a salt brine. So, you know, our usual recommendation, if you have joined us for other webinars, is when you're making a brine, I usually tell people 1 teaspoon sea salt to 1 cup of water. And the reason why I didn't go into details is because people can get too bogged down by this when they're starting to ferment and they feel that it's too complicated. So that's why we greatly simplified it. 1 teaspoon to 1 cup of water. And actually it works really well. I still kind of do it that way. But we've gotten a lot of questions of people asking like, well, how do you measure salt salinity? So here we go. All right, you guys ready? Okay, you don't have to be a math genius because I'm certainly not, and I can manage this. But there's one thing I want to point out. I advocate using sea salt, and for reasons that I've explained before. There are minerals; it's better for your health, and in my mind, it makes a better tasting ferment. But there are people who use kosher salt. There are people who use Himalayan salt, which is extracted from. Actually, Himalayan salt is mined, so I don't prefer that. I prefer naturally sourced sea salts. So when you look at the salts, as you can tell, this is actually a natural pink sea salt. This is a fleur du sel, which is kind of flaky and very light and just very beautiful. And this is a coarse gray sea salt. So when you go ahead and measure 1 teaspoon, a lot of things can happen. So I'm going to grab a teaspoon here. For one thing, make sure it's 1 teaspoon. And the way people measure, me as a chef, I always take it for granted that people measure 1 level teaspoon. But of course, that is not the case. A lot of people scoop this and they go, oh, that's 1 teaspoon. But there's a big difference between 1 teaspoon and leveling it off 1 teaspoon. So in the world of baking, those of you who bake, you know that when you measure something by teaspoon, you need to level it off in order to get the right measurement. Because if you scoop it up just kind of willy-nilly like that, that could be 2 teaspoons or 1.5 teaspoons. Is not accurate. So when you're doing any kind of accurate measurement, you really need to level it off. Okay, in this case, you want to do that. Oh, sorry, that was the cherry from the knife. So you want to level it off. Okay, that's one thing. And then as you can see, because there's liquid or some kind of moisture in the salt, it's sort of sticky. Whereas this one is a lot less looser and it's actually easier to measure. Let me get a clean knife to level this off. So when you scoop into that and you measure it, you kind of want to do that to get 1 level teaspoon. Okay, and then the same thing with this. So then, in other words, 1 teaspoon, you have to measure it and level it off. And then depending on the salt that you're using, the measurement could vary differently because, this is light and fluffy, this is more dense and fine, and this is very coarse and it contains a lot of moisture. So the weight variance could differ. It's not going to differ dramatically in this case with 1 teaspoon, but if you're measuring a lot, it could differ dramatically. And again, for those of you who bake, you know that if you have variance like this and you're trying to scale up, you're going to be in trouble. So then to be really accurate, you're going to grab a scale and measure. So I have a very accurate scale here. Linda, are we able to see the scale at the close-up camera? Do I need to make any adjustments?
Scoot it a little bit more closer to the left edge of the board, if you can.
The
your
scale?
left.
Okay, maybe if I angle it this way, is it clearer for our viewers?
No, go closer to where the camera is. Yeah,
like
there
that?
you go.
Okay,
yes.
So you guys, I have sort of a fancier scale where it measures minute quantities. So you may or may not have it, but like I said, don't be bogged down by this accurate measurement. If you go by the 1 level teaspoon to 1 cup of water, you're good for most things. But for those of you who want to be more precise and geek out a little bit, this is how you're going to do it. So you're going to grab a container, zero it out, 0. Okay, and then we want to make sure we're in grams, and this is in grams. And now we're going to measure. I'm just going to take this middle salt and level it out. And even doing this, you're going to get variance. So let's call this 1 level teaspoon, and we're going to drop it in. And that weight is 3.70. Okay, so that's this type of salt. Let's put it back. Make sure it goes to 0. And now we're going to scoop this one and see how much
Karen,
this
hold on a second. People are
Yep.
saying that we're not able to see your close-up camera.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
seeing it. So
maybe we need to give a little
happened.
tutorial. They need to look for something that says camera 2.
Okay, so the close-up view is the camera 2 window. And
Okay.
you could pin it if you want to have that appear larger on your screen.
Okay. Yeah, we'll give it a second for people to kind of find that. Yep, technology is great when you know how to access it. So are you
Okay.
guys able to find camera 2? Yeah, so Karen Wang Diggs is camera 1, and then camera 2 is camera 2, our close-up.
Okay. So people are saying no camera 2 on their screen.
Huh, that's interesting. Everybody? Nobody is seeing camera 2?
Okay, hold on one second. Hold
Okay.
on.
Sorry, folks. And we were thinking like this would be groovy because oh, there's camera 2. Thanks, Linda.
Okay. All right. Now we're seeing a close up.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Linda, for doing that. Okay. So just a repeat for those of you who didn't see the close up. The first salt that I measured, it was 3.7 grams, okay, on this scale here. And then now I've measured the other salt and I've zeroed out my scale, and let's see how much this weighs. And this one, dramatically different, is 5.7. Okay, so the other one was 3.7. This is 5.7 grams. I'm just going to tilt this a little bit. I don't know if people can see that. Okay, so you get the point of this. Depending on the salt, you're going to have variations in weight. So now we're going to figure out the salinity with the amount of salt. So the formula is pretty simple. So I'm going to shut this off. So in order to do this, you need a fairly sensitive scale. But like I said, if you don't get too worried about it. Okay, so now the formula for that is, I feel like I'm being a teacher here. So the first salt was 3.7 grams. And then it's universally accepted that 1 cup of water is 237 grams. Okay, so what we want to do is divide 3.7 grams by 237, and then you get, oh, you know what? Because my phone's acting as a second camera, I have my old-fashioned calculator here. Okay, so we're going to take 3.7 divided by 237. Again, we're in grams here, you guys, equals 0.156. And then you're going to do times 100 to get the percentage, equals 1.5 salinity, which is optimal for most ferments. So that's how you figure out the salinity of a given salt that you are using. Now let's take the other number I have for that pink salt. It was 5.7 grams per teaspoon, again, divided by 237 grams. So we have 5.7 divided by 237 grams equals 0.024 against times 100. It'll give you 2.4 salinity. Okay, so that's how you guys do it. It's pretty simple. I'll try and turn this around. So again, you take the weight of the salt and you divide it with the weight of the water in grams, not volume, weight. Okay, so everything in grams, and you do the simple division, you get a point number times that by 100, and you get the salinity percentage. Okay, so that's how we do it. Super easy. If I can do it, you can do it. But again, don't be too bogged down by this. Usually, if you just take a good measurement of a teaspoon, within that range, most ferments would do just fine. Okay, so I hope I haven't given everybody a headache. It's easy. And actually, we're going to put together a chart that people can download on the ChouAmi website and probably on crowdsource too. So if you just can't do the math and you want to refer to a chart, just know that that's coming up, and we'll announce it in our next newsletter. All right, so that's brine salinity. And the reason why I took a little bit of time to mention that today is because with fruit, because of the higher content in the sugar of the fruit, you want to use a higher, slightly higher salinity to make sure that we go into lactic fermentation and preservation and not into an alcohol ferment. So usually with my fruit ferments, I could go, sometimes I'll go as high as 1 tablespoon to 1 cup, but generally I use about 2 teaspoons of this lighter type of salt. I usually vary between, actually I vary between all 3, but like I said, I usually eyeball. I use about 2 teaspoons of salt, sea salt, to 1 cup or 237 grams of water. And then I make my brine. I always have some brine sitting on my kitchen counter because I'm always fermenting. So that's basically salt salinity in a nutshell, so to speak. And that's really our recipes. Now, I do want to show you with the cherry. This was fermenting since June 20th. So today is what's today's date, Linda? Help me out, 26. So it's been fermenting for 6 days. I will let it go for a little bit longer. And as you can see, everything is nice. It looks beautiful. Oh my God, it smells really amazing. I just can't describe it. You're gonna have to do it for yourself and see how it goes. Now, because I've kept the cherries kind of at half cut and then the onions. So if you want to turn it into more of a chutney texture, guess what? All you have to do is take some out, grab your knife and chop it, and make it more chunky, more like a salsa, or like I said, a chutney, like that before serving. And then you can just spoon it over anything that you want. Okay. And as far as the cherry is concerned, it's like salty and sweet and tangy. And I get a little hit of the vanilla and more of a subtle hit on the cinnamon. And so that's why I love fermentation. As a nutritionist, the health values are indisputable, but fermented foods just have a much more sophisticated gamut of flavor profiles that when you are used to eating it over time, I personally feel it actually trains and articulate my palate even more so that I enjoy my food much more now. So that is how you turn this sort of more chunky ferment into more like of a salsa or chutney quality if you want to do that. But if not, you can just spoon it out and enjoy it whole on anything. Okay, so that's basically my little spiel on the recipes. Before we open up for questions, I did promise the making of a cultured cocktail. So I will do that with my blueberry brine. So let's move this away for the time being. All right, and we're just going to concentrate on making a cocktail before we open up for Q&A. So here's my blueberry, like I said, that I fermented last summer. And I intentionally keep jars that I keep for a year just to see what happens, but you should not be keeping it for a year. You should be enjoying it. Okay, so these are the blueberries that I fermented. And as you can see there, they look fabulous even after 1 year in the brine. And when I pop one into my mouth, it's so, the first time I tasted it, there was like a cognitive dissonance because I expected to taste blueberries, but then there's a salty aspect to it. And then, like I said, it tastes like olives too. So we're going to use this to make our cocktail. Here's our cocktail shaker. We're going to grab some ice. Okay, I think 3 will do. Okay, the sad thing about making this cocktail at 10:30 or 11 in the morning is it's actually too early for me to have a cocktail. So it's going to kind of go to waste. So anyway, we're going to grab our vodka. Okay, and depending on the size of the martini glass you're using, it could be 1 jigger or 2. So here's our measuring device. And I'm just going to do a very clean martini here. No excess ingredients. I'm just going to do that. But for those of you who like martinis and you like it dirty, you know that you add in a little bit of brine from the olives. So keeping that in mind, we're going to add in some of this brine because that is what's going to make it really visually beautiful. So there it goes. So again, think dirty martini, but instead of olive brine, we're adding in fermented blueberry brine. Okay, cap your device and shake it about 30 times. So I've been told by mixologists. That was 20, 10 more. Okay, or 31, 32. All right, here is your martini glass, and we're just gonna decant it. You know, I have an infatuation with a martini glass. I just think it's one of the most beautiful designs. Sometimes I just drink my water kefir in a martini glass because I like it so much. All right, so there's our beautiful fermented blueberry martini. And I'm just going to fish out 3 blueberries to put in there as garnish. 2, 3. All right, there we go. Nice and elegant. And like I said, this color is really amazing. And the brine actually has a lot of benefits because for those of you who know about the benefits of blueberry, you know that there's a lot of antioxidants and proanthocyanidins in it. That's what gives it that blue color. So this brine here, after fermenting, do not throw it away. Either drink it for its benefit. You can add it to a salad dressing. You can make cocktails with it. You can marinate things in it before cooking. So again, the brine, as with your pickle brine and your sauerkraut brine, has a lot of health benefits. It has a lot of flavor, so do not toss that out too. And of course, that way you're not wasting anything. All right, so basically that's fermenting fruit. Here's our cocktail. Cheers, everyone. Like I said, I'm not gonna have it right now. I'll put it behind the counter here. And I think we should open up for questions because we have about 15 minutes left until it hits the hour. All right, Linda, so go ahead.
Okay, I'm just trying to get all of our right windows on here.
Okay, so while you're doing that, I do want to make an announcement. So we are going to do a giveaway, and actually our next webinar in July, so mark the date, July 23rd is a Wednesday. So we're kind of alternating between a weekend and a weeknight to accommodate all of our culture friends in different time zones. So the next one is going to be July 23rd. And I'm going to have Kirsten Shockey. She is the author.
Karen, it's July 21st. You said 23rd.
Oh, okay, is it a Wednesday?
It's 21st.
Okay, 21st. Sorry, you guys. Mark your calendars for July 21st. Okay. I'm going to have a special guest. She's a friend and definitely a fermentation expert. She knows a lot more stuff than I do. Kirsten Shockey. She wrote this book called Fermented Vegetables, and she's actually written, her latest book is on vinegar. So I already have her confirmed to be on as a guest. And I'm going to ask her to speak a little bit about fermented vinegars and anything else that she wants to speak about on our next webinar. So that's very exciting. But we are also doing a giveaway with her book and the ChouAmi fermentation kit. Plus, we're going to throw in a pounder and some spices and some extra jar. So it's going to be like a really hefty giveaway gift package that we're going to run on Instagram starting July 8th. So we'll make an announcement for both Crowdsource and ChouAmi. And if you're on Instagram, keep a lookout and enter to win the giveaway. All right, so that's my announcement. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, so I know we have different levels of fermenters here in the class,
Mhm.
and we're not going to be able to get through every single question that was asked. So
Right.
we prepared this fermentation FAQ document that just has some basic questions and answers about fermentation. So I just dropped that in the chat. Feel free to take a look at that, and that might answer some of your basic fermentation questions. So we're just going to address questions specific to what Karen just did in the class today in our Q&A. And
Great.
for anyone who needs to jump off, thank you for attending, but I do want to drop all of our social media handles in the chat, so you can follow us there. You can do both crowdsource or ChouAmi or either one, whatever you like, but those are our social handles there. And that's where we would post new recipes and images and links and stuff. So feel free to follow us there. And you guys all got here, so we assume that you're already on our mailing list. But just in case you are not on our mailing list, you can sign up for our mailing list on either of our websites. So I will drop that here again. Okay, so that is all for folks who may need to jump off. Thanks again for coming. All
Yes,
right,
thank
so
you.
yeah,
Hope to
so
see you again.
we will try to get to some questions, and there's a lot, so I'm just gonna randomly choose them. We can't
Okay.
really answer all of them. So just kind of at the top level, a lot of folks are asking if you can use frozen fruits.
Okay. Oh, so by the way, I just want to address like all of the questions coming in. Whatever we cannot answer, I will take that document that we download and I will answer every single question, and then we will share that file with the replay link that we'll be sending to all the registrants for this webinar. Okay. All right. So Linda, the first question, frozen fruits. Okay, frozen fruits, not ideal because fresh fruit, and the more organic, the better, will ensure that there is adequate lactic acid bacteria on the fruit. So frozen, not ideal. If you absolutely have to use frozen fruit, then you have to mix it with fresh vegetable or fresh something to ensure that there's lactic acid bacteria on it. The reason why I say is questionable because some frozen products are not, they don't spray any kind of chemical on it and it's just strictly frozen, but some they do. So whatever they add on to the frozen vegetable before it gets frozen might have killed off the lactic acid bacteria. So it's really, really hard to say. So my encouragement, if you're starting this for the first time, use the best quality fresh fruits that you can.
Okay, do
Yeah.
you layer the onions and the cherries or mix them together?
I just mix them together. But if you want to like give it actually, you know, in this case, layer it because the color of the cherries will color the onion. So after the first couple of days, you can't see the differentiation in color so much. So you can just mix it in and then pack it in, just like I did.
Can you use fresh rosebuds?
Yes, you can. Yeah,
Oh, this is now for the
absolutely.
blueberry recipe, right?
Yes, for blueberry. Yeah,
Oh,
for
okay.
blueberry. Yeah, yeah, of course you can. Just make sure it's not sprayed. You don't want pesticide in your ferment.
Okay. How are you using the fermented fruits, like chutney or in combination with other things?
Yeah, for instance, the blueberry, you know, I will use the brine like to make a cocktail or to make a salad dressing. And then when I make a salad, I just, you know, scoop some out and toss it with it, very much like you would olives. And then for the other one, you know, this one for the plum, actually, you know what? I can show you on the plum. Let me bring back my another chopping board. The plums are really, really tasty, the whole plums, and it's so easy. So here's the whole plum fermented from last summer. When you cut into it, you guys keep your eyes on the second camera if you can, or if not, I'll bring it up to show you. So when this whole plum is fermented, it becomes more firm. And then when you cut into it, it still retains this, it's as if it's a fresh plum when you cut into it. And then what this is really good with is if you pair it with cheese, like if you put together a cheese plate, this is really delicious. Okay. Or after fermenting, you can also puree it and turn it into a hot sauce and add like chili and stuff to it. So there are many, many ways to utilize the plum. And I think in our crowdsource cookbook, I used the plum and paired it with a chocolate brownie or something. So there are many ways to utilize the fermented fruit once it's done. I'm going to have some plum. Next question, please.
Okay. Were the cherries sweet or tart?
They were tart cherries. Oh, sorry, I'm chewing. When you're doing the cherry recipe, don't use mushy old cherries. They need to be nice and firm.
Okay. Cardamom, can you use ground or do you have to use whole cardamom pods?
I like to use whole cardamom pods and give them a light crush because they're fresher that way. Ground cardamom deteriorates very quickly. And depending on, the quality, it may not be that good. And ground cardamom also tends to be very, very strong. And cardamom is a strong spice. So if you just happen to put in too much, it may overwhelm your ferment. So I prefer pods.
Okay. Can you also do other berries like a lot of berries and blackberries?
Okay. Yeah, great question. I didn't bring that up. So there are people who are like fermenting strawberries, and those don't work so well because they have a lot of water content. And they, in my experience anyway, they tend to turn mushy. I guess the way that you can do it is maybe double the concentration of the salt salinity, but I personally have actually not done that. I've done strawberries and I've done blackberries, but like I said, it just didn't give me a super great result, but you can definitely experiment with it. But again, whatever fruit you're using, especially for those, water laden berries, make sure that they are very, very firm.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's move on to the salt. There are lots and lots and lots of questions about the
On salt.
salinity.
Okay, sure.
So can you please clarify what is the ideal percentage for fermenting fruit?
So, you know what, we're stepping into like a little kind of new territory here, because as far as I know, there are not a lot of people fermenting fruit like I'm doing right now. Like I don't know of anybody who's fermenting blueberries. I came up with that recipe a few years ago, or the combination of cherries with onions. So whatever I'm advising you is strictly my own experience in my own kitchen and having preserved them over a period of time. So for me, with these fruits here, the blueberries, the cherries, the kumquat, I use, if we had to do the math, I use about a 3.5% salinity. Okay. But then again, depending on the salt, is going to give you different salinity percentages that you're using at home. So to make things easy, generally I do 2 level teaspoons of a sort of grainy salt like this. So it's not super fine, but it's not chunky. Okay, so a salt that's kind of like that. And I do 2 level teaspoons to 1 cup water. With all of these fruits that we talk about, it works really well.
Okay, so I hope that answers folks' questions about salinity.
Yes. Yeah.
There's lots of people wondering about if they should wash the fruits or not
Okay.
wash it because of
Yes.
the
Okay.
bacteria.
Right. Okay. So by the way, the lactic acid bacteria lives sort of throughout the fruit. It's not only on the surface, but I definitely get concerns about, well, should I wash it? Should I not? I give it just a very quick rinse under cold water and I shake it off. I tend not to soak it, because also you don't want the fruit to get waterlogged. And that actually brings up a good question, because when I started fermenting fruits, I've always been told like there's lactic acid naturally occurring on fruits and vegetables and on dairy products. But when I looked at fruit, I'm like, is it going to work? So I've done some research, definitely through the years that I've been fermenting fruits. So I don't know if you guys can see this article. I can share the link of this article, but the article title is Lactic Acid Bacteria from Fresh Fruit and Vegetables as Biocontrol Agents of Phytopathogenic Bacteria and Fungi. So the synopsis of this article is that scientists now, are actually realizing that the lactic acid bacteria that's naturally occurring on fruits possibly can work better than chemicals to preserve food. So there's a lot of experiment going on right now to extract certain lactic acid bacteria from fruit and from vegetables to help as preserving agents. So I just want to mention that because I needed some scientific basis to assure myself, first of all, that there is lactic acid bacteria on fruits and that they are indeed acting as agents for lacto-fermentation. So I just wanted to address that first. The second part is if you are getting it from the farmer's market and it's organic, there's no pesticide, then just give it a light, quick rinse to get rid of the dirt or whatever, and then you can use it. Honestly, with fermenting fruits, I just don't recommend conventional, especially with berries, because they are heavily sprayed, conventional fruits are. And if you're fermenting, it's just gonna not be a healthy thing to consume. So that's my personal opinion. But if you just want to play with it, around with it, and you're not able to find any organic fruits, then you can try conventional, but maybe give it a better rinse.
Cool.
So I hope that addresses that question.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think we'll just end it on a few other fruits that folks are interested in.
Sure.
How about persimmons or citrus or apples?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So citrus, definitely, I've had enormous success. Some of you might have backed my Lemonade campaign in which I fermented lemons and garlic and made a spread. Citrus works great. The kumquats, that's citrus. And then, so lemon works really well. And then of course we have the classic Moroccan lemon, which actually has a very high concentration of salt. So actually for Moroccan lemons, I don't know how much live culture is in that because of the high salinity. And it's not something that I can address. It would have to be taken to a lab. But then the other fruits, I mentioned mango before, and then persimmons. I do have recipes on crowdsource in which I preserve persimmons for the holidays and so forth. So another thing that I didn't mention, because it's going to basically require another webinar, is that when you're doing high sugar fruits, there is a way that you can kind of go around it and ensure that they're live cultures, is that you want to add in whey, W-H-E-Y. And you make whey by straining yogurt. So I did a little sample here just so I can quickly show people. I put some yogurt over a cheesecloth, and then over a period of a few hours, you get this liquid, and that's whey. So whey has probiotics in it. It has the lactobacilli strains in it, and it will help you ferment sweeter fruits in less time. So there's less likelihood of it turning into alcohol. But like I said, that almost calls for a different webinar because it's going to be more detailed, and you just need to watch out for that a little bit more. But maybe the short answer is yes, I do go onto the crowdsource website for those recipes. And maybe as we get closer to the season with pomegranates and persimmons, we'll do another webinar, and I can definitely show everyone how to make those fruit ferments.
Okay, let's see. Other stone fruits, peaches and apricots, would you need to leave the skin on?
Yes, so I've done apricots, and again, make sure they're firm, because I did some apricots that were they were ripe and they just became kind of mushy. So apricots, and what was the other one?
Peaches.
Peaches. I've done peach once. It just wasn't great. It wasn't ideal because the peach is very big. And if you try to ferment it whole, for me, it just wasn't a great experience. And peaches also, if they're anywhere ripe, the sugar content is very high. But you can definitely experiment with peaches that are unripe and still very firm. I think if you cut it into slices and maybe mixed it with cabbage, you could do a peach sauerkraut, a firm peach sauerkraut. Actually, that sounds kind of good. I might experiment with that. But again, so any fruit, stone fruit, they need to be firm. Yep.
Right. Okay. All right. It is 11:30. We do want to respect people's time. So
Yes,
any
absolutely.
questions we didn't answer live, Karen will type that up in a different document and we will send that out along with the link to the recording. So
Yes.
if you need to rewatch any portion of this class, you will have that probably by the middle of next week. Since we tried the new 2-camera thing set up for today, can I just get a little bit of consensus in the chat? Do people like the 2-camera setup, one a wide shot and one a close-up? If you like this, please drop that in the chat. Yes or no?
Yeah. Yeah, that would really help us to make the next webinar experience better. So I appreciate the feedback.
So I am seeing a lot of yes.
Okay, good.
So
all right.
That's right. Okay. So again, thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming
everyone.
today.
Have a great weekend wherever you are. And again, remember the date for the next webinar, July 21st, and I hope to see you then.
Yes, we will send out information
Cheers.
about that and when you
Okay.
can register later on when we have that ready to go. So make sure you're on our mailing list or follow us on social so you can hear about that.
All right, everyone. Thank you again. And take care. Enjoy your summer weekend. Bye-bye.
Yep. Have a good summer.
Yes, keep fermenting.
Okay, so I am stopping recording.